It's good to have all of you with us here on America's Forum on Newsmax TV. We're also going to bring in the latest news on politics, health, and money news throughout the course of the day. But right now we're going to be joined by Newsmax senior editor David Patten. David, it's great to have you with us.
Good to be with you, John.
All right, so let's talk real quickly about these Senate races shaping up in 2014. There's some interesting things going on right now in Kentucky when we have a new poll released from Rasmussen today. And let's take a look at the poll, how current Minority Leader Mitch McConnell stacks up right now against Democratic challenger Allison Grimes. Both are tied at 42% in this Rasmussen poll. What was your thought, your first takeaway when you look at these numbers?
Well, of course, it's really early in the cycle. You don't want to exaggerate the significance of a poll this soon. But it suggests that the minority leader is in a battle here. And he's particularly in a battle because obviously he hasn't shored up his right flank. So the vulnerability for all Republicans is from the right in the primaries. Of course, all Democrats, it comes from the left. So he's already going to be fighting and spending a lot of resources just to get through the primary. And then this implies that he has his work cut out for him over the course of the general election.
And here we have that poll for you. You can see at a dead heat there, Allison Grimes on the left, Mitch McConnell, of course, the minority leader on the right-hand side of the screen. This is all particularly interesting as well. And this also goes back a long time. Mitch McConnell's been dealing with this, when we talked about Ashley Judd so long ago. But when you stack up Allison Grimes against the Republican insurgent, the challenger, Matt Bevin, it's interesting because Bevin is actually leading against Grimes. So he has more favorable poll numbers in a head-to-head matchup with Grimes, the Democratic challenger. That would have to really back up what you just said and highlight the fact that how deep of trouble McConnell is right now, at this point at least.
Yeah, McConnell, of course, a veteran warhorse of politics. You never want to underestimate him. The problem is that if Kentuckians are saying now that they have a couple of relatively lesser-known figures who they might vote for, and Matt Bevin is actually doing better against the Democrat, then, really this might be a good point for the McConnell people, some of the establishment folks in Washington who are backing him, to kind of step back and take a more strategic look at their campaign and try to figure out now where they need to go with this. Do they need to be more aggressive in attacking President Obama, for example? Do they need to maybe reach out more to the grassroots right and maybe sort of diffuse some of those persuadables, few though they may be, on the right and convince them to take another look at his candidacy? So I think this would be an obvious case where they really, I'm not going to say need to go back to the drawing board, John, but they need to really be careful here because, your goal as obviously incumbent minority leader is that, you would hope to be in a dominant position, and he seems to be far from it.
And clearly not there. Let's go ahead and show the poll that we do have of Bevin and Grimes, which shows him in the lead. And you can see that now. Just a slight lead, 46% to 42%, but significant because, there has been talk on how important the Tea Party is going to be in 2014. Is their power what it once was? And this would be an example that the Tea Party is still a potent force when it comes to politics. Or I guess maybe Mitch McConnell, is this backlash from Democrats because Kentucky, as we've heard President Obama highlight and some of the other Democrats highlight, that it's one of the few states where the enrollment seems to be going better.
Yeah. Well, the grassroots conservatives have really never been completely comfortable with Mitch McConnell. I mean, from the very beginning, when they came in January of 2010, they identified McConnell as really one of those establishment Republicans that they identified with George W. Bush, and a lot of people don't recognize that really the Tea Party movement, as much as anything, grew out of a backlash to the policies of the George W. Bush administration, right, as much as it did Obamacare and President Obama. So, given that he was really never in good with them, number one. Secondly, the strength of the Tea Party in that region of the country is strong. I mean, there are some states where the Tea Party is stronger, and unfortunately for Mitch McConnell, Kentucky seems to be one where, they're very strong. And
so in other words, a reflection on the popularity and the strength of the Tea Party in Kentucky, not necessarily a reflection on a growing influence of Democrats in the state of Kentucky. Right. We're talking about the Tea Party, and it's hard to talk about the Tea Party without Senator Ted Cruz. He kind of You know, he's like a blimp that hovers over everything in politics, at least conservative politics as of late. You just had a chance recently to go up to Washington. You sat down with Senator Cruz. There was an article on Politico today that talked about Ted Cruz, who we see on the screen here, making nice with some of the more establishment members of the Senate, guys like John McCain, who has called him a wacko bird. Apparently the two are joking back and forth. Cruz has apparently agreed not to campaign against some incumbent Republican senators. You know, based on your conversation with Cruz recently, who was also featured in the February issue of Newsmax magazine, what do you think what do you make of this recent tack, I guess?
Yeah. So I think it's more tactical than strategic on Cruz's part. When you talk to Ted Cruz, and we had the opportunity to sit down with him in his Washington, D.C. office and really get into the roots of his philosophy, his worldview. And it actually goes back to his father. We've all heard this story. His father immigrated. He had $100. He shows up in Austin, Texas. He gets a job washing dishes for 50 cents an hour, puts himself through University of Texas, gets a degree in math, goes on to start his own business, and now his son is not only a U.S. senator, but is fighting perhaps for an opportunity to one day run for president. So Ted Cruz told us that he literally grew up at his father's knee. He said as early as 3 or 4 years old, with his father telling him about his Cuban-American immigrant experience and telling him that freedom was something that you could never take for granted. And in fact, that if you don't fight for freedom, the inevitability is that sooner or later you will lose it. And this is a core value of Ted Cruz.
So he's walking the walk here and just not talking the talk. This is hard baked into who he is.
Well, I wouldn't say that his outreach to the other senators is in any way duplicitous, but let's be practical. There's 100 people in that elite club, and you really have to get along, and it is in his best interest to get along, especially if he wants to have a future with the party. I mean, it would be fairly inconceivable, for example, in 2016, that he could run and actually get the nomination with no support from the party establishment. You've got to have some support. So, yeah, I think it's more of a tactical maneuver at this point. I don't think it's going to change who Ted Cruz is, and I don't think it's going to change his position on policy.
Now, you and I have just discussed this. We talked right after you got back from the interview, and you talked about how smart Ted Cruz is. We've had Alan Dershowitz tell us he's one of the smartest students he ever had at Harvard Law School. I think you even mentioned he may have a photographic memory. So, you know, although Cruz appeared like to be bumbling through the whole shutdown thing, do you think this may have been his plan all along, to go up there and really shake things up? Maybe not, maybe he didn't anticipate that the reaction would be as harsh as it was to the shutdown, but really get into Washington, shake things up as soon as he could, and then take a step back and try to get things done.
That's what the Cruz people want you to believe.
Oh, so I'm drinking too much Cruz Kool-Aid
maybe
right
a
now?
little too much Cruz Kool-Aid. That's what they want you to believe, that this was all part of the master plan, that he was going to perform this elegant act of political jujitsu, turn what looked like only just a few months ago a really dire political mistake into what would actually be an advantage. You know, in some ways it has become an advantage for Republicans because of that sharp distinction that he helped draw with his 21-hour filibuster. You now have Republicans who can point to Democrats all around the country, Democratic senators included, and say, we were against it, we voted against it, we went to the wall on this thing. They were for it. They said you could keep your insurance. That could have really big implications. So he comes out smelling like a rose. Was that part of the grand strategy all along? I'm a little bit of a skeptic, but you know, we'll wait and see, and certainly up till now it's redounded to his benefit, perhaps surprisingly.
And as we look through all this through the lens of this, you know, the tension within the GOP, there are conflicting stories that, you know, you can use one anecdote as an example of the Tea Party being strong, another anecdote at perhaps Cruz maybe moving towards the establishment, a little bit of their party diminishing. But then you look at Karl Rove and his organization, Crossroads. I'm going to read something real quick from the BizPac review here. If GOP consultant Karl Rove is trying to figure out why he's struggling to rally support for his causes, maybe he should remember an old truth, that the Republicans' party true strength is its conservative base. Karl Rove is not raising as much money as he would like to do. You know, is Karl Rove, is his influence going to continue to wane? You know, is he still suffering the blowback from 2012?
Well, the reports of Karl Rove's demise have been greatly exaggerated. I feel very comfortable saying that. You know, one of the most skilled political operatives we have on the American scene, has this tremendous American Crossroads organization, spent $300 million in the 2012 cycle on Senate and congressional and presidential elections. Just a huge amount of money that went through that organization. Their problem is that they spent that money without a whole lot to show for it. Didn't win the race at the top of the ticket. Actually lost a couple of seats in the Senate. So the thinking is that really what we're looking at here is a hangover. And we'll have to watch as the races, approach, whether they can start to turn that around. However, it's interesting to note that while the four leading sort of establishment Republican organizations raised about $7.7 million in 2013, the four leading conservative organizations, FreedomWorks and some of the other major ones,
Heritage Action,
right, they raised over $30 million. And so they outpace them substantially. So that's something that obviously Karl Rove and his strategists will have to keep a close eye on.
Yeah, and we're still trying to figure out who needs who more in this whole thing, the Tea Party or the establishment. And it's interesting to watch all this play out. And hopefully, I know a lot of Republicans would like to see both sides say that, hey, we need each other. Maybe we should, patch things up. And I think that would happen, right?
Oh, of course. I mean, they're such natural allies. No, in fact, of course. All kidding aside, there are elements in the Republican Party who are basically just saying, can't we all get along? In other words, isn't our real goal, our immediate goal, shouldn't it be to try to win the Senate in 2014? Of course, they need a net gain of 6 seats. So it's no small undertaking to try to accomplish that. Right. So, that's sort of the mainstream kumbaya, let's all get together. It's not going to happen. The mainstream and the grassroots are so much at odds. It's almost like you would think you had a different party there. So whatever the fate is going to be of the Republican Party, I'm highly skeptical that it's going to depend upon party unity, at least until we get past the primaries. The grassroots candidates who win, the establishment candidates, and then we move to the general. Then they'll unite. I guess the good news for Republicans is that both the grassroots and the mainstream of the party, one thing they do agree on is they need better candidates. They need candidates who aren't going to talk about legitimate rape.
All right. Well, we can bring all this up because we have a guy who knows a lot about the grassroots movement and about the establishment. That's Orrin Hatch. He'll be with us in just a second. We're going to talk to Senator Hatch about the IRS scandal. He's a member of the Senate Finance and Banking Committee. I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say to that. So we'll have more on that. Plus, also we have Fred Fleitz, who is with us from Lignet.com. He has served as the chief of staff to John Bolton, also a former CIA advisor. We'll have his take on Iran's threat to mobilize with terrorist sleeper cells in the United States. Plus, what does Iran's latest saber-rattling mean for the nuclear and peace talks down the road? We'll have more on all of that when America's Forum continues right after this break.